Thank you, Madam Mayor. You have a copy of the board's submission, and you've also heard and received from many residents and community groups in the Hagley Ferrymead ward. During the pre-consultation period earlier in the year and during the consultation in September and October, board members spoke with many individuals and groups in the community and are aware of the support for the current Hagley Ferrymead Community Board. We would like to thank all of those groups and individuals for their submissions and their support and their work and for their communities. The board does support the proposal for 16 wards, but is not in support of some of the proposed boundaries or the names for the wards. And the board also has concerns with the proposed Banks Peninsula Sumner ward and its representation, which we've covered in the submission, and I'll talk to in a minute. So attached to the board's submission were maps provided with the support of staff, showing alternative boundaries for the proposed Linwood-Woolston wards, very similar to what Paul McMahon was showing you just earlier. The proposed ward maps consulted on divided significant communities and omitted key areas within those wards, such as Woolston Village actually being in the Linwood ward instead of in the Woolston ward. And the proposed maps that we've provided would address this. The board is not in support of the layout of the current proposed central ward, and you'll have heard from community groups on this as well. We're supportive of it being aligned to the east instead of to the north, and in support of submissions made by groups representing the residents in the central city and east to their alignment to the Linwood instead of St Albans. The boundary for this ward should represent the current communities of interests within it. Several of the community groups in the inner city and inner city east submitted on this. Rayleigh from the inner city east residents group called it a family, and Marjorie from the Victoria Neighbourhood Association talked about the old city neighbourhoods in the central city, Woolston and Linwood, staying together. These are areas that have not just been linked together since community boards came along, but since the early years of our city. The board proposes that the name Sumner, with the proposed Banks Peninsula ward and the community board and the subdivision, does not accurately represent the areas within the subdivision. The board suggests that bays would be more appropriate, and community groups, which we spoke to during consultation, were clear about this and have also submitted on it. You'll have heard Linda Rutland suggesting an alternative coastal bays. In its submission, the board submits in general support of the proposal for 16 councillors, but has concerns with the proposal for one councillor to represent the proposed Banks Peninsula Sumner ward. The board's submission questions the workload and ability for one councillor to represent the geographical area and its communities is achievable and will provide the representation proposed. It is a case of fair numbers not being the same as effective representation. And for that reason, along with many groups and individuals, the board requests that the council argue to the Local Government Commission for an exception to the plus or minus 10% fair representation requirements for Banks Peninsula. One councillor to represent the proposed ward does not provide for effective representation and puts together communities that have significantly differing interests, for example, urban and rural. Our affected communities have also submitted and spoken clearly on the matter in the hearings, and while they have differing solutions, the message is very clear. It has been encouraging to see the discussion around the council table during these hearings and the willingness to look at this again. The board does also not support the reduction in the number of community boards. The proposal reduces representation at the grassroots level, and the board submits in support of 8 community boards for the Christchurch city. With the currently proposed 16 wards, the board submits that there should be 6 community boards in metropolitan Christchurch and 2 in the proposed Banks Peninsula Sumner ward. And given the board's submission point earlier regarding the councillor representation, the board acknowledges that the specifics for the 8 community boards would need to be reconsidered, and the board would welcome the opportunity to be involved in this. The board's submission refers to Mike Richardson's report setting community boards in context, prepared in 2008 for the Royal Commission on Auckland Governance. This is a comprehensive document which has some clear points on community boards. The community board chairs have been given a copy by staff to help inform our initial discussions on delegations. And on page 81 it sets out a framework for making community boards effective. There are 7 key elements, 2 of which are directly related to the current representation review. The first, that they must have stable boundaries that reflect communities of interest. Many groups have talked about the good relationship that they have with their current community board and the relationships that they have with other groups which operate within their ward. A key example is Te Whare Roemata, who you heard from last week. Splitting Linwood and Linwood from Woolston would have a detrimental effect on this community of interest and make the work of the organisations much more difficult. There is also a question over the completely differing communities of interest which would be put together in the proposed Banks Peninsula ward, which we have already addressed. The second is that community boards will only be effective as long as they operate with integrity and build and maintain trust. This again talks to the long-term relationships with the community that a board has and was a key concern for the groups that submitted in the inner city and Linwood areas, as well as those from the coastal bays area. The board submits in support of community boards being established from wards sharing communities of interest. One of the key parts of this is that Linwood and Woolston should be in the same community board area. The board's submission includes comment on the number of community board members elected or appointed to each community board as well. And as per the Local Electoral Act, every community board must consist of at least 4 members, but not more than 12. The board submits in support of representation that includes a minimum of 6 members on each community board in Christchurch City. While in 3 ward community board areas this is easy, having only elected 4 board members and 1 councillor in each of the proposed Banks Peninsula or in a 2 ward community board area would be detrimental to the decision-making process, as it would limit diversity and debate. And now, questions?
Questions? Phil?
Thanks very much, Sarah. And indeed, your board's submission ties in very well with the other submissions we had from community groups in your area, as you referred to. I just want to ask you a couple of questions for clarification, and it's around the central ward. Yeah. So are you really, is your concern really with the boundaries of the central ward rather than having a central ward per se? Is it the current boundaries?
That's right, it's the proposed boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other question really is just around just for clarification again, you're really saying, look, for the community boards to work effectively, you would see needing a need for at least 6 members. So in effect, that would be an increase in the number that is proposed.
That's especially true for Banks Peninsula. I think that, so currently the Banks Peninsula community boards have 6, sort of 5 elected plus the councillor, so that's 1 fewer than the urban community boards. And I know that there are issues when, you know, there might be someone away or sick, and really if you've only got 5, and if the councillor's busy because there's only 1 between the 2 boards, or if there's another member away, then you're really lacking that breadth of debate and diversity around the table.
And then thank you, Sarah, for clarifying that. And then my last question really is, if council, as a way of sort of resolving the representation for community boards, especially in the metropolitan area, would you be supportive of the possibility of having an additional community board for the metropolitan area?
Yes, we would like an additional community board from that which is proposed. Yeah.
Great.
And it could be that Linwood and Woolston become 1 community board area, Burwood and Coastal, and Spraydon and Cashmere.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yep. Andrew?
Thank you, Sarah, for the submission. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between the Ferrymead part of your ward and Banks Peninsula, and the way that that's viewed as part of the initial proposal. So you mentioned some capacity issues for the councillor that you felt might affect representation.
That's right.
We've heard from community groups on the city side of the Port Hills that they don't necessarily feel that there is a community of interest with Banks Peninsula, and perhaps that they look down Ferry Road into Woolston more as a community of interest.
That's right.
Would that be the board's view, or do you feel that there is a community of interest between the communities on the city side of the Port Hills and the peninsula? What
we've heard from the community is quite clear, is that they do see themselves as being quite separate, and the board are representing the community's views in this. So the urban areas have submitted quite strongly that they feel more part of town than part of Banks Peninsula, and that they feel that having 1 councillor to represent that whole area would lessen their representation around the table.
And further question just on the current proposal. You were talking about 6 members per community board.
Yeah.
Does that mean that if we were to continue to look at what's currently termed the Littleton-Sumner Community Board, you would support 3 members from the Sumner side of the hills and 3 members from Littleton Harbour?
The 6 could include the 1 councillor, so as it would be currently. So it could be 3 and 2, or it could be 3 and 3. The Littleton Harbour area has quite a large geographic area, That's not something we have looked at with the 3 and 3 as a board, though.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Just a
Pauline.
clarification, sorry if I'm not keeping up, but when you said 6 community board members, is
Yep.
that plus the councillor?
It could be including, so currently Banks
be
Peninsula has 6 on the
Yeah,
community
yeah.
board, including their appointed councillor.
I'm thinking more of the city side. Are
Yeah.
you thinking either or, 5 plus a councillor or 6 plus a councillor?
That wasn't something we discussed as a board, but it would make sense to have as much diversity and debate as possible for good decision making. And if you had, say, a Linwood Woolston ward and a Burwood Coastal, then you would only have 4 directly elected community board members, plus the 2 councillors, which would be 1 fewer for a community board area than it is currently, though the geographic area would also be smaller. So, yeah.
Glenn.
Thank you. Are you a bit concerned, and we heard a similar thing from Pam before about if, say, Linwood was put in with Burwood and Coastal at a community board level, that in terms of fair and effective representation, that that would be swamped a bit by the
Complexities of the coastal issues.
Yeah.
And the red zone and coastal issues are really significant in the city.
Okay.
Linwood has a range of issues, but they don't gain as much prominence often as those ones, but they are long-standing issues. And we heard very clearly last week from the Linwood organisations too, Te Whareroe Mata and the Inner City East, that they felt that they would be overlooked if they were part of a larger community board that included the other areas.
Okay.
They also see that their key community of interest is with Woolston, and there are many groups which operate throughout that whole Linwood-Woolston area, and they are ones which have a relationship with the board through various grants and funding, and that would make that much more difficult if they were split.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions? No? Okay,
No.
look, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. So